I didn't make out all of that, but I presume it was suitably flattering. Thank you for your hospitality. For the local vodka as well, by the way. I've got my backup here as well, in case I start running a little bit dry. I've only got 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep it fairly brief and hopefully interesting to you as well. I'll try and work this flicker as well. But I really want to talk to you a little bit about, and I promise to slow it down for the translators as well. I want to slow down. I want to talk a little bit about the conditions necessary for mobile to be successful in a work-based situation. We all, over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, have become very intimate with mobiles. They've become part of our life, really. On average now, we check our mobile phones 150 times a day. That's once every 8 minutes. So they've become a very, very close part of our world. If there were a fire alarm now and we had to run, we may leave some things behind us, but definitely our mobile will come with us. Yeah? And it gives us a huge opportunity to tap into, to try and leverage for learning purposes. And if you think about it, for the first time, going back to the days of Socrates, we have the opportunity of using a piece of material, kit, in a way that can activate learning for the first time ever. I don't think yet we're even close to doing that. If I go to some of these learning conferences, people go on about their learning management systems and tracking and all that, and it's all rather dull discussion when they're missing an extraordinary opportunity to really leverage this. But it takes for a change in the way you think and look at mobile. So really mobile is not about technology, it's about culture and it's about perception. And what I want to really try and do with you today is just give you a different lens to look at your learning. And then if you accept that premise, mobile becomes an enabler of delivering that. So mobile is a deliverer rather than an end product, if that makes sense. So let me start with a little bit of video for a piece of fun. And this goes back to 1999 and a great film that many of you will have seen called The Matrix. I'm going to see if this works. So if I go this way instead. Okay, so this is a short clip and it speaks quite quickly, but I'll go back over it and deconstruct this for a second. So if Machi up there would play video for me.
Can you fly that thing?
Not yet.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
Okay, so let's just hold that for a second. So a number of things are going on there. Now normally if I'm running a longer session, we can have an interaction, we'll talk about this, but we don't have the time, so I'll zip through it. The learning environment is classically not a classroom. It's on the top of a building. So the first thing is we are away from your classic learning environment. If I asked you to draw for me on a piece of paper what a learning environment classically would look like, it's unlikely you would put the top of a skyscraper. So the first thing is location is anywhere and everywhere. The second thing is the skill gap. He said, can you fly that thing? And what does she say? She says, not yet. So there's an acknowledged skill gap by the user. And that's more important than it may seem, because part of the culture change is, do we trust our population to self-diagnose their own skill gaps? If we don't trust them to do that, all of this other stuff becomes slightly irrelevant. So the second component is the skill gap. The third thing, is the compelling event. They need to be able to fly the helicopter because the bad guys are coming up the stairs. So again, without a compelling event or an occasion in your workplace, this won't work. Because we're moving from a push, which we talked about this morning, to a pull-based environment, to call down material. And if you are moving from a mandatory or a compliance-based learning environment to a self-service one, you need to trust your people to acknowledge their skill gaps. Fourthly, you have a moment of transmission between the top of the roof and the knowledge hub, which is where the program is. And you saw there a Motorola, one of the original Motorolas, which I think now have been bought and sold by Google in the meantime. So you have a way of getting it through. Okay, so these are kind of important because when you talk about cloud or mobile learning, it can become rather abstract and maybe even quite philosophical. So I use this clip to really tie it down to a couple of key things. You've got a location, which is anywhere. You've got an acknowledged skill gap. You have a way of transmitting the knowledge. And then you have a compelling event to drive that as well. And these are the important considerations when you're looking at mobile. And most of these are to do really with culture rather than just to do with technology. Technology is one of those aspects, actually, of those four. With me so far? You okay with that? Good job. In London, so many of you may have visited, when you get into our local taxis, the black cabs, you not only enjoy a good right-wing conservative conversation with the taxi driver, but also he or she will have done 3 or 4 years of what they call the knowledge. And that means that they need to learn 22,500 streets and 300 specific routes between those streets in their head. It takes a long time to do that. And if they neurally scan a taxi driver, if they're bold enough to do that, they'll find that in fact the memory side has slightly changed. The shape of their brain has changed a little bit. So the benefit to us, of course, is that you tend to get a taxi driver who knows where he or she is going. So there's a big benefit to that. Now think on the right-hand side. So the left-hand side there is the certificate they get when they pass the knowledge. On the right-hand side, we have a GPS or sat-nav system. Yeah, and it also has some benefits because you don't need to do 3 or 4 years of tutoring to get to that point. And also it can go live and find out where you are in the city and say, avoid this route, which you normally would take, because this is all congested. Now, more informally, the taxi driver may also know this as well, but this is able to track and course adjust in real time. And the thing about mobile is not trying to replace what's on the left, the knowledge, but instead trying to supplement it with another way of looking at how learning is. And in fact, in future models of the sat-nav or GPS, you may be able to change the preferences so the speaker adopts a more right-wing or conservative approach as well. I don't know, that might be in later editions. But again, I want to offer you just a way and a model of looking at learning, of shifting it from this deep-lying semantic knowledge to shifting it to more procedural side. Because I would love to consider the mobile phone as a mini GPS or sat-nav in your phone. And where you get stuck in those moments where you need a bit of attention, perhaps it's having to have a difficult conversation with a colleague or having a strategic review with a client, you're able to look at your sat-nav and it gives you some options as where you need to go. Yeah, and that's a really kind of a way of looking at how we might situate the learning content. All right? So behind that is, and I've been using some images from Banksy, which is a UK or English-based graffiti artist, and I like the idea of graffiti really because it's slightly disruptive. And at the same time, it has a great art of its own. So I'm using some images from Banksy here as well. So it's slightly iconoclastic, but at the same time, it's making some very important points. And I want to offer you a model here, which will be on the slides if you wish to get them, in terms of how you shift. And this is the framework, and this is to a degree where innovation lies. If people talk about technology and innovation, they're lying. Technology is not innovation. Technology is just a piece of code, zeros and ones. Even if you shift to heuristic or fuzzy logic, it's still zeros and ones. So innovation lies in the way that people look at things, and then perhaps in the way they use technology to deliver against that. And the innovation here is this blue line down the middle. And this is the hardest, if any fans of philosophy, the epistemological shift, the shift of way of looking at knowledge that you need to make. Now, classically on the left, we look at knowledge as skills, putting them into the head or the mind of the user, and he or she, when they go out to the workplace, they hopefully are better, faster, stronger at delivering. So if you go to a business school or go to one of the corporate programs on leadership, the assumption is that when you go back into a leadership role, you're a little bit better than you were before that. And if that isn't the case, then there's going to be some questions asked, needless to say. I'm not trying to get rid of the left-hand model, but what instead I'm trying to do is supplement it with a right-hand model. By the way, in the left-hand model, traditional learning, I also put most e-learning as well, which I think is fairly old-school approach, push-based learning. On the right-hand side, I'm going to offer you a way of supplementing that. But if you notice, some of the objects have changed. Now the driver isn't necessarily bringing you into the campus and putting knowledge into your head and pushing you out. Now the driver is the event itself. So it is that conversation you need to have with a colleague at 3 o'clock. That's the driver. Going back to the Matrix, that compelling event, the bad guys coming up the street. This is the driver. And you use that driver to move the user towards where the knowledge repository lies. So essentially now you've got a device that is with you all of the time. By the way, I'm not touching my pacemaker here. This is where my phone is. And they use the device to call down the content. Okay? You get about 2 minutes of attention from the user to do this. So if they cannot access, identify, and call down the content within about 2 minutes, they'll move on. And I think earlier the guys at Fusion were talking about connecting learning management systems with mobiles. You have about 2 minutes of time to do this. Okay? So what we're trying to do here is beginning for you to look at a pull-based environment rather than push, and supplementing the two, not trying to replace. That's a disaster. That's why e-learning in the 90s didn't work, because they saw it as a replacement for face-to-face. Okay, so that model is really where the innovation lies. And if you look at your learning from the right-hand side, a lot of things become different. And I'll finish with a short video which will explain some of those conditions. Okay, so the idea then behind this is this combination of push and pull, because we are not in a world of free jazz. In an organization, there are behaviors that are required. There are metrics and KPIs that need to be achieved. And the organization needs to communicate and get them out there. So what I'm saying is that, for example, working with one client, Dell, for example, that is shifting from being a company that sells hardware, things you can see and touch, like a laptop or a hard drive, to selling services such as educational software, security systems, and so on, cloud management. That's a shift from being, for the sales representatives, from being selling products to selling services. And that could be a piece that goes in blue, which is this push piece. We need to be more consultative when we are dealing with our customers. And that's the what piece. And to a degree, that's fairly easy to get out there. Companies are quite good at doing that. But here's the smart thing in terms of how you deploy your material. Why not try and anticipate the competencies that each user will need to deliver against that output? If you like the hows, the pieces that are in red. So for Dell, the push piece is that we need to be more consultative with our customers. Then you can lay out a buffet, if you like, of the hows so that they can call them down if they need them. And that might be things like building trust, strategic influencing, and so on and so forth, active listening. These are the skills or the competencies to deliver against this output. And this is a smart way of organizing your material in this push-pull modality that gets to where you need to be, but trusts the individual to work out the bits that they need to call down in order to deliver against that. Is that okay? And technology can help that by meta-tagging and various ways of deploying material so that people can do it. And of course, as well, organizations can upload their own material as well to show how they've been able to deliver against that as well. And that's the social collaborative learning that's been talked about before lunch, and Perry will pick up in a minute. So this way of combining the push and the collaborative is really, really key. And this goes back to this earlier point about it really more being about trust and culture and less to do just with technology. Okay, and that's the hard bit really in terms of management. So this push-pull piece is a very effective way of organizing your material. So I want to wrap up then with some pieces. I'm not going to go through all of these because I don't really have the time to do that. But I want to just say first of all that you have usually, particularly on a mobile device, about 3 or 4 minutes worth of attention. And what is really interesting is that an individual's sense of duration is different from device to device. So for example, if I played you a piece of material on my smartphone and then played it for you on this large screen, your sense of how long the piece lasted would be radically different actually. So people are quite ruthless when they're looking at their phone, and they give you about 3 minutes worth of time. So you've got 2 minutes to identify the material and 3 minutes to call it down and play it. So you have a 5-minute zone of discretion to get those skills in there. And when you get that content into the head of the user, for it to be successful, it needs to feel personal, and that means it needs to fulfill what we call the WIFM, what's in it for me. The second thing is it has to have utility. It needs to make the user feel better, faster, or stronger. Okay? We use mixed media or animation a lot of the time because it is twice as efficient as classic video in packing the messages into that 3-minute horizon. Okay? We also try and keep it personal in the sense that the tone of voice needs to shift from being, if it is, prescriptive or didactic and move more towards a coaching or buddy style of speaking. So the tone of voice you adopt in this learning modality is incredibly important to get right. People do not like being preached at on their phone. They like to call down supportive or coaching content, and so on. And in the end, you also need to make the whole interaction feel easy and intuitive rather than clunky and tricky and long form, which some historical e-learning has suffered from. Okay, so we're about 16 minutes now. I'm going to finish with a short video which kind of summarizes what I've talked about this afternoon. And also as well, you'll see a link at the top, so if you want to go and get the video for yourself, and there's a QR code here as well that you can collect on your phone if you wish. And through that, you'll be able to make contact with me or the team here at SEKA, and you can get a copy of the slides if you wish as well. So let me just play you this 2 to 3 minute video which pulls together some of the strategies that I've talked about so far, and then we'll leave it at that. Okay? You hit the video if you would for me, Machi.
Albert Einstein said, if I had 1 hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem. I think we can all agree he was a pretty smart guy, so it's a good idea to take his advice. Defining the problem means asking the right questions. We have less and less time available for face-to-face learning interactions, so many learning departments are being asked to rethink their learning strategies. Before we look at this challenge, let's quote Al again. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. If we're looking to rewire our learning, to get new ways to support our populations, we need to ask the right questions. Questions rooted in the old way of behaving will not yield new ways to approach learning. Let's look at how these new questions will alter our approach. First up, how can I publish the material? Instead, think, how can I socialize the material? Learning content for the 21st century needs to be pull rather than push-based. It needs to be available on demand, as and when it's needed, and then easy to identify and access. With new channels and devices coming on stream, such as social media and mobile, the natural question is, how can I blend the learning, right? Wrong. Ask instead, how can I enable the user? The issue with blended learning is that although it may feel new, it's actually part of the old push mode. Instead, we have to enable users by providing easy and elegant access to a variety of learning objects, as well as the ability to share and rate the materials. In the past, you'd ask, how can I track? The sweet spot now is, how can I tag? This change of approach shifts the focus from tracking usage and certifying that a module has been completed to encouraging higher performance. This isn't to say tracking is unnecessary, it's just more important that users associate or tag the material with events and initiatives. Finally, it's no longer a question of how can I embed. Embedding is required when there is a time gap between the learning moment and a delivery moment. But now, with mobile, the content is with the user all the time, so the focus should now shift to the utility of the material. Does it address and support the upcoming challenge? Here's an idea. Have your user base rate the content. They're the ones actually using it. Framing the questions in this way also changes the role of the L&D function. You move from being a knowledge broker, intermediating between blocks of knowledge, skills, and your population, to being a Sherpa, a guide, to help learners take responsibility for their own development.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much for your hospitality. Best of luck for the rest of the afternoon.